My name is Madeline Gray, and I'm 38 years old. If you saw me on the street, you'd probably think I had it all figured out. I look composed, professional, maybe even confident. But that night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by a mess I didn't create. Empty takeout boxes, unfinished manuscripts, my sister's laundry mixed in with mine. A cold cup of coffee sat on the edge of my desk. It had been there for hours, maybe days. You see, I wasn't always like this. Or maybe I was. I just didn't know it yet. People think I'm strong, the dependable one, the sister who always shows up, the daughter who never complains, the friend who listens more than she talks. But inside, it's been hollow for a long time. And if you've ever lived your life playing a role someone else wrote for you, you'll know exactly what I mean. Before I go on, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if stories of family betrayal and personal rebirth speak to you. Now back to my story. I live in Chicago, in a modest walk-up apartment that I used to love. I'm a freelance editor, and I make enough to get by. Not rich, not struggling, just invisible. Growing up, I was the firstborn, the fixer, the one who filled in the gaps. My sister Lorena? She's different. Charming, reckless, magnetic, the kind of person people make excuses for, and my parents did, over and over. When her marriage fell apart, after a storm of drama and bad choices, she showed up at my door with 2 suitcases and a rescue dog. She smiled and said, "Just a few days, sis. I just need to breathe." I nodded. Of course I did, because that's what I do. But that night, staring at the piles of her things swallowing my living room, listening to the distant sound of her laughter on the phone, I felt something crack, something old, something deep. The role I never asked for had finally become too heavy, and I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of everything changing. Lorena didn't just move into my apartment. She moved into my space, my time, my silence. At first I told myself I could handle it. She'd been through a rough patch. Again, she just needed a few days, a safe place to land. But the boxes kept arriving. Makeup kits, kitchen gadgets, shoes I didn't recognize. She even brought a blender she never cleaned and a houseplant she forgot to water. It wilted on my windowsill like a quiet warning I chose to ignore. "Sorry," she laughed, tossing her heels into the corner. "I'll clean up later." But later never came. My routines disappeared. The peaceful mornings when I brewed coffee and read quietly? Gone. The tiny workspace I carved out by the window, drowned in her laundry and unopened Amazon packages? The dog barked all night and she didn't notice, or care. I kept editing manuscripts through the noise, pretending the chaos was temporary. But every time I opened a new document, I felt a little more disconnected from the words. My focus unraveled. I tried talking to her. Once. "Lorena, I'm on a deadline. Could we maybe keep it quiet during the day?" She blinked, confused. "Madeline, you're always on a deadline. Relax, you're so uptight." That night, she hosted a single girl freedom night with loud music and wine. I stayed locked in my room, reading emails from a publisher who was slowly losing patience with me. I had already missed 2 meetings. The silence I once loved now throbbed with tension. And just like that, my home no longer felt like mine. Maybe that's when I realized how long I'd been holding everything together, not just for Lorena, but for everyone. Growing up, I was the buffer between her and our parents. I did the chores, I got the grades, I followed the rules. I made their lives easier, and they expected it. Dad used to say, "You're the strong one, Madeline. You'll always be okay." Funny how that sounds like love, until you realize it's permission to be forgotten. Lorena was the wildfire. I was the fireproof wall, reliable, sturdy, forgettable. When she broke things, I cleaned up. When she lied, I covered. When she cried, I listened. And when I needed help, I stayed quiet, because that's what strong girls do. But strength, I've learned, has a limit. The moment I truly felt it crack was a Tuesday. I had just lost a major contract, a $20,000 deal I'd been building for 3 years. The client had tried to reach me during a Zoom meeting that never connected. Lorena had tripped the power with her hairdryer and space heater running at the same time. I sat there staring at the email that read, "We're moving forward with someone else." My fingers trembled, not from rage, but from a quiet, pulsing grief. It wasn't just about the money. It was about being so tired of living at the bottom of everyone's list, including my own. I called my parents that night. Maybe I just needed to hear someone say, "That's not okay. You deserve better." But that's not what I got. My father said, "She's your sister. Family looks out for each other. My mother added, "Madeline, you're older, more stable. You can handle this better than she can." I didn't cry, I didn't argue. I just stared at the blank wall in front of me and realized something terrifying. They didn't see me. Not really. Not as a person with limits, or dreams, or boundaries, just as a solution. I was the emergency contact, the backup plan, the one who never needed anything. And for the first time, that broke my heart. Because what's more painful than being unseen by the very people who claim to love you? I hung up and sat in the dark. Not because the power was out, but because something inside me had finally gone quiet. There's something strange about watching your life be slowly rearranged, item by item, moment by moment, until you barely recognize it anymore. It didn't happen overnight, at least not in the way a fire burns a house down. It was slower than that, like a leak in the ceiling you ignore until your favorite book is ruined. Lorena had officially taken over the apartment. My couch was no longer mine. It was her dog's bed and her casual throne. The kitchen counters were buried under protein shakes, lip gloss, and avocado peels she never threw away. She'd moved my spice rack to make space for her smoothie station. "My turmeric was there," I said once, reaching for a jar that had vanished. "Relax," she waved me off. "I'll buy you another one." She never did. But it wasn't just the clutter. It was the sound. Lorena was loud. She lived loud. Music playing at all hours. Phone calls on speaker. The kind of laughter that made walls vibrate. She FaceTimed friends from the bathroom. She played meditation videos full volume at 2 a.m. and somehow called that self-care. Meanwhile, I was trying to edit a memoir about grief. Ironic, really, while drowning in the noise of someone who felt absolutely no guilt. I'd invested weeks into a new project. It was delicate, demanding, emotionally intense, and yet I found myself reading the same paragraph over and over, my concentration shot by the clinking of wine glasses in the other room. I once asked her, nicely, to keep things down during my work hours. "God, Madeline," she rolled her eyes. "You're always working. You need to loosen up." She said it like a compliment, like I should be grateful someone was helping me live a little. But the truth? I wasn't living. I was shrinking. Shrinking into corners of my own home, shrinking under the weight of someone else's presence, shrinking my expectations, my comfort, my voice. I started working odd hours just to find silence. Waking at 5 a.m. to steal 2 hours of quiet before the blender and yoga chants began. I took long walks in the cold just to breathe. I even started bringing my laptop to the library, like a college student chasing clarity. And through it all, I said nothing. Because that's what I'd been trained to do, to carry the weight quietly, to accommodate, adjust, absorb. I told myself she was in transition, that family supports each other, that I was being generous. But that generosity was becoming a burden no one saw. Except me. One night she came home from a party, barefoot and laughing, holding a bottle of champagne and a half-eaten slice of cake. "Don't be mad," she said, giggling. "I invited a few friends over, just for a bit." A few friends turned into 10. There was music, spilled wine, someone accidentally locked in the bathroom. I stayed in my bedroom, gripping my laptop like a life raft. I had a Zoom meeting the next morning with a publisher in London. The dog barked. The music pulsed. I said nothing. The next day, that meeting never happened. The power went out halfway through her third hairstyling session. She'd plugged in a curling iron, a space heater, and a diffuser at once. My modem fried. My computer shut down. The call dropped. By the time I got it back online, they had already moved on. The contract was gone, $20,000. But the real cost? The slow erosion of the life I had worked so hard to build. And I realized something chilling. Lorena didn't just move into my apartment. She moved into my peace, and she had no intention of giving it back. There's a particular kind of silence that follows failure. It's not peaceful. It's deafening. After I lost the contract, I just sat there, frozen, staring at the error message on my screen like maybe it would reverse itself if I blinked slowly enough. But it didn't. The publisher's email came 20 minutes later. "We appreciate your time, Madeline, but due to communication issues and timeline concerns, we've decided to go in another direction." $20,000, 3 years of relationship building, gone. Because someone needed mood lighting and a space heater during a party I never agreed to host. I didn't yell, I didn't scream. I didn't even tell Lorena what had happened. I just walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood at the sink, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. That's the moment I realized I had been gaslighting myself for years, telling myself it was normal, that I was overreacting, that family means sacrifice. But what they never told us, what no one teaches you, is that sacrifice without boundaries becomes self-erasure. And I had slowly erased myself, not just in my apartment, but in my life. I started to replay every moment where I made myself smaller so someone else could shine. Every late night I worked while others slept. Every time I swallowed my frustration, tucked it behind a smile, and nodded. Every family dinner where the spotlight was on Lorena, and I was left to refill drinks, clear dishes, and listen. When Lorena got married the first time, I helped pay for her dress. I worked 2 extra freelance gigs just to cover the deposit. No one asked me to, but everyone expected it. When she got divorced, I helped her move out, twice. No one ever said thank you. Not because they were ungrateful, but because they assumed I didn't need to be thanked. I was Madeline, the capable one, the one who didn't fall apart, the one who could handle it. And then, that night, after the contract fell through, I realized something so heavy it almost knocked the breath out of me. No one was going to come save me, not my sister, not my parents, not even the people who relied on my stability like it was some kind of endless resource. I was standing in the ruins of my own life, quietly, while the rest of them carried on. I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want an apology. I just wanted space to breathe. I wanted someone to look at me and say, "You shouldn't have to do this alone." But I knew that call wasn't coming. Still, I made one anyway, to my father. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Dad, do you have a minute?" A pause. The background hum of a TV. "Sure, what's up?" I explained everything. The noise, the power outage, the lost client. I even told him I was drowning in work and exhaustion. He sighed. "Well, she's your sister, Madeline. What do you want us to do?" I didn't know what to say. So he added, "You've always been the more responsible one. I know it's tough, but she needs help. She's not as strong as you." That was the moment I realized. They didn't see me breaking. They didn't think I could. Because I had been strong for so long, they mistook it for being unbreakable. But I was breaking. Quietly. Completely. And the scariest part? No one even noticed. After I hung up with my dad, I sat there in silence, holding the phone like it might still offer something more. A second chance, a better answer. But the line was dead. So I did something I rarely do. I called my mother. She picked up almost immediately. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, cheerful and unaware. "Is everything all right?" I hesitated. I never called unless something was wrong, and we both knew it. "I just needed to talk," I said quietly. "About Lorena." There was a pause. "Oh," she said. Just that one word stretched thin and sharp. I told her about the noise, the mess, the way my home no longer felt like mine. I told her I'd lost a major client, that I was exhausted, that I didn't feel seen, that I didn't know how much longer I could keep doing this. When I finished, there was silence. Then she said, "Madeline, honey, I know you're tired, but Lorena's going through a hard time. You know how fragile she is." I let the words sink in. "Fragile? She's been through so much," my mother continued. "The divorce, the move, starting over. She needs support. You've always been the more stable one." I almost laughed. I wasn't stable. I was surviving. But to her, I was still the eldest daughter with the steady hands and the quiet mouth. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "I've been supporting her for months, financially, emotionally, physically, and no one has once asked me if I'm okay." She sighed, the kind of sigh that carries disappointment. "Madeline, don't make this about you. You know your sister has always needed more." There it was, that old familiar message. Your needs don't matter as much. You can carry it. You always do. But I didn't want to carry it anymore. I didn't say anything for a long time. Just listened to the silence on the other end. Then she added, "I don't want the two of you fighting. Family has to stick together." And that's when it hit me. They didn't see what was happening as imbalance. They saw it as normal. Me giving more, her taking more. That was the family equation. It had been for years. And somewhere along the line, I had agreed to the terms without realizing it. Because I thought love looked like sacrifice. Because I thought being the strong one meant saying yes even when I wanted to scream no. And now that I was finally saying it, they didn't know what to do with me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I was just tired. Tired of being the safety net no one thanked. The emotional landfill where everyone dumped their mess. The daughter who disappeared behind her sister's spotlight. So I ended the call. No big blow-up. No dramatic declarations. Just a quiet goodbye. And for the rest of the night, I sat in my room, staring at the ceiling. Lorena's laughter echoed from the living room. She was FaceTiming someone, giggling about a weird client meltdown she'd overheard through my door. She had no idea the meltdown was mine, and maybe she never would, because no one was watching me closely enough to see I was falling. The night I ended that call with my mother, something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't sadness. It was a kind of clarity. Cold, quiet, undeniable. I realized I could disappear and no one would notice. Not really. Not the version of me they depended on. That version didn't have a name. She was just a role. The fixer, the fallback, the steady pair of hands that never let the plates drop. So I started watching. Not just them. Myself. I noticed how often I apologized. For noise I didn't make, for things I didn't do, for feelings I wasn't supposed to have. I noticed how many sentences I began with, "I'm sorry, but..." I noticed how often I said, "It's okay," when it really wasn't. And I began to wonder, when did I stop expecting to be understood? One morning, I woke up early. Not to work, not because of noise, just awake. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from caring too much for too long. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee and tried to remember the last time I felt like someone's daughter. Not their obligation, not their expectation. Just loved, simply, without condition. I couldn't. It was always wrapped in something. "Madeline, can you help with your sister's rent?" "Madeline, could you fly home and handle the bills?" "Madeline, we trust you to take care of this." They trusted me, but not enough to ask how I was doing. Just enough to assume I'd never say no. And the worst part? They believed they were being kind, because I never told them otherwise. Lorena, meanwhile, floated through the apartment like she was on vacation. I'd hear her planning brunches, Tinder dates, last-minute weekend trips. The only time she looked concerned was when the Wi-Fi glitched. She never asked why I was working longer hours, or why I barely spoke at dinner, or why I started locking my bedroom door. She never noticed I'd stopped eating with her, that I took my meals on the balcony even when it rained. She didn't notice because she never had to, because I never made myself visible in the ways that demanded care. Not to her, not to anyone. But that morning by the window, I started thinking about what it would mean to be visible, what it would mean to stop apologizing for being tired, to stop pretending that being needed was the same as being loved, to stop accepting crumbs from people who never learned how to feed me emotionally. That thought stayed with me all day. I watched Lorena come and go like a guest who had overstayed her welcome but never saw it. I listened to my parents leave voicemails about family dinners and obligations, always ending with, "We love you," like it canceled out the silence in between. And by evening, something inside me whispered, "This isn't home anymore." Not just the apartment, the whole idea of what I thought family meant. Because home is supposed to be the place where you're safe, where your name means more than your utility, where love sounds like "let me help you," not "you can handle it." But that wasn't my story. My story was a woman drowning in plain sight, applauded for how well she held her breath. And I knew. I couldn't keep holding it much longer. I didn't leave in a storm. There was no screaming, no slammed doors, no suitcase hurled down the stairs. That would have been too easy, too loud, too unlike me. Instead, I left the way most women do when we've had enough, quietly and with a strange kind of grace that doesn't come from peace, but from exhaustion. It was 11:47 p.m. when I made the decision. Lorena had fallen asleep on the couch again, a half-finished glass of wine still in her hand, some reality show playing in the background. The dog snored on my throw blanket. One of my manuscripts sat open on the floor, stained with red wine from a party she didn't bother to clean up after. The lamp buzzed faintly above me. A fruit fly circled the sink, and I just stood there in the hallway, looking at the place I once called home. It looked like mine, but it didn't feel like mine. And in that stillness, something inside me clicked. This wasn't burnout. This wasn't a phase. This was a slow erasure of self, and I had finally reached the edge. I walked to my room and pulled out a small canvas duffel bag, the kind you take when you don't know how long you'll be gone. I packed without overthinking. My laptop, a few favorite books, A framed photo of me and my dad when I was 6, before everything got complicated. My journal. A gray sweater that still smelled like clean linen. And my toothbrush. Everything else could stay. I wasn't escaping in the middle of the night to make a statement. I was choosing silence. Choosing myself. I wrote a short note and left it on the kitchen counter, folded neatly beneath a coaster so it wouldn't blow away if someone opened a window. It read, "Taking space to breathe. I'll be okay. Don't call." I looked at Lorena one last time. Her face softened in sleep, the way it always did when she wasn't performing. There was a time I would have kissed her forehead, or tucked a blanket around her, or second-guessed everything. But that time had passed. I didn't owe anyone an exit speech. I owed myself an entry into something better. The hallway felt unfamiliar as I walked down it with my bag slung over my shoulder. The walls looked grayer. The floor creaked in places it never used to. I stepped outside into the cool air. No tears, no music swelling in the background, just the sound of a late train passing and the city lights blinking quietly overhead. I didn't have a perfect plan, but I had a friend. Mara and I hadn't spoken regularly in years, not since college. Life, work, distance, it all got in the way. But a month ago she'd sent me a casual text after reading an article I edited. "Still the best in the game," she wrote. "Proud of you." I replied, "We should catch up soon." We never did. But that night, I called her. She picked up on the second ring. "Mads," she said, groggy. "It's almost midnight. Are you okay?" "No," I whispered. "But I'm leaving, and I don't know where else to go." "Come here," she said without missing a beat. "You've got a key. Use it." No questions, no judgment. Just a door already half open. That's the thing about real friends. They don't need a full explanation to love you. I took the train to her side of town. It was nearly empty. A man in a janitor's uniform nodded at me. I nodded back. I wondered for a moment if he could see the crack in me, if anyone could. But mostly, I felt invisible and, strangely, lighter. I arrived at Mara's just past 1 a.m. The building was old, full of creaky charm and warm yellow lights. Her spare room was small but clean. A stack of fresh towels, a handwritten note on the nightstand. "Make yourself at home." And for the first time in a long time, I exhaled. Not because everything was solved, but because finally, the only person I had to take care of was me. The first morning I woke up at Mara's, it was quiet in a way I hadn't experienced in months. Not the hollow silence of being ignored or forgotten. It was stillness. Soft. Kind. The kind that wraps itself around you like a warm scarf and says, "You're safe now." Sunlight spilled through the window, catching the corner of the bookshelf in a golden haze. The walls were painted a calming sage green, and the sheets smelled faintly of lavender. No barking dog, no blender, no stomping footsteps or shouting from the hallway. Just the rhythmic ticking of a wall clock and the distant sound of city life humming far enough away that it didn't feel like pressure. I lay there for a long time, not scrolling through my phone, not checking my email, just breathing. That alone felt radical. Eventually, I got up and made coffee in Mara's tiny kitchen. She had a little French press, some mismatched mugs, and a fridge with exactly the kind of random things single women keep. Spinach wilting in a bag, a bottle of rosé, 3 half-used jars of jam. It made me smile. She came out a few minutes later barefoot, wrapped in a blanket, her hair sticking up like she'd lost a fight with gravity. "Morning?" she said, eyeing the coffee I was pouring. "Made enough for both of us," I offered. She nodded, then leaned against the counter and looked at me. Not with pity, not with curiosity, but with something better. Recognition. We didn't talk about everything that morning. She didn't press me for a timeline or the details of what broke me open. Instead, we drank our coffee on her little balcony and watched the city wake up. At one point, she said, "You look different." I raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "Like you're finally not holding your breath." I hadn't realized how much I had been until then. Later that day, I opened my laptop and tried to work. Just one document. A short story someone had submitted about grief in the ocean. I read the opening paragraph 3 times. And for the first time in weeks, the words didn't blur. My mind didn't wander. I edited the piece slowly, deliberately, and when I sent my notes back to the writer, I didn't feel depleted. I felt steady. It wasn't some grand epiphany, no angels singing or bolts of lightning, just a quiet return to myself. And God, that was enough. I spent the next few days rediscovering the rhythm of a life that belonged to me. I took long walks by the lake without checking my phone every 5 minutes. I sat in cafes and eavesdropped on strangers, remembering how much I loved the way people talk when they don't think anyone is listening. I texted clients back on my own time. I laughed, real laughter, with Mara over dinner, sharing stories about our college years, bad dates, weird landlords. And slowly, the tension in my shoulders began to loosen. The voice in my head, the one that whispered, "You don't deserve this. You should go back. They need you," began to quiet. Because I realized something I hadn't dared to believe before. No one was going to give me permission to rest, to breathe, to choose myself. I had to take it. And now that I had, I wasn't giving it back. It didn't mean I had everything figured out. I still woke up some mornings wondering if I was selfish. I still flinched when my phone buzzed, half expecting a guilt-laced voicemail from my mother or a passive-aggressive text from Lorena. But I didn't answer. Not yet. Because I was beginning to understand that loving people doesn't mean letting them drown you. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for them, is to walk away before you disappear completely. Healing didn't come in a dramatic burst of inspiration. There was no movie moment where everything clicked and I suddenly knew exactly what to do with my life. It came in pieces, quiet pieces, like waking up one morning and realizing I'd slept through the night without grinding my teeth, or noticing the way my shoulders no longer curled inward every time my phone buzzed, or hearing myself laugh, not politely, not out of obligation, but with my whole chest, at a story Mara told about her boss mispronouncing quinoa at a team lunch. I started going for walks again. Nothing fancy, just 10, maybe 15 minutes around the block, wrapped in my favorite scarf, earbuds in, listening to instrumental jazz like I used to in my early freelance days. I passed strangers without fear. I stood in the bakery line without checking emails. I felt the ground under my feet. And more importantly, I felt present in my own body, something I hadn't realized I'd lost. One afternoon, I found a small notebook tucked inside my bag. I didn't remember packing it, but there it was, blank pages waiting. I opened it and wrote a single sentence. "I do not owe anyone the parts of myself I need to survive." I underlined it twice. Then I kept writing, about what I missed, what I wanted, what I'd given away in the name of being a good daughter, a good sister, a good everything. I wrote about the fatigue I carried in my bones, about the way my apartment never felt like mine, about the silence I'd endured, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that comes when no one thinks to ask if you're okay. I wrote about how I'd been angry for years without realizing it, how I'd mistaken patience for passivity, loyalty for obedience, love for sacrifice. And in writing it, something shifted. It wasn't a purge, it was a return, a way of picking up pieces of myself I'd left behind for the sake of peace. Mara noticed the change before I did. "You're glowing," she said one morning over breakfast, handing me a slice of cinnamon toast. "Glowing?" I laughed. "That's a strong word." "I'm serious," she said, crunching into her toast. "It's like you've come back to yourself. You're sitting up straighter, smiling more. You even stopped apologizing for existing." I paused, the compliment hitting deeper than expected. She wasn't wrong. I had started saying no. No to deadlines that weren't mine. No to guilt I didn't earn. No to conversations that left me feeling hollow. And every no was a yes to myself, a yes to space, a yes to rest, a yes to softness. One night I lit a candle by the window, sat on the floor with a cup of tea and listened to rain tapping against the glass. No distractions, no pressure to be productive, no one else's energy filling the room, just me. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt whole, not healed, not yet, but healing. And there's a difference. Healing is messy, it's layered. Some days you feel powerful and free, other days you cry over a voicemail that sounds like the old version of you begging to be seen. But what I knew, sitting there in that soft candlelight, was this. I didn't need to go back. Not to the apartment. Not to the role. Not to the version of myself who believed love had to be earned through suffering. I was building something different now. It was small, it was slow, but it was mine. It had been just over 3 weeks since I left. 3 weeks of waking up without panic. 3 weeks of working without headphones jammed in my ears. 3 weeks of remembering who I was before life turned into damage control. I thought the worst was behind me, but betrayal has a cruel way of showing up when you least expect it. It started with a text from Mrs. Howard, my neighbor from the old apartment building. A sweet, sharp-eyed woman in her 70s who spent her afternoons tending to her rooftop herb garden and keeping tabs on everything and everyone. Her message read, "Hi, sweetheart. Hope you're well. Just thought you'd want to know. Your sister was out front this morning selling things from your unit. Some of them looked personal." I froze. At first I thought it had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe she was getting rid of her own things. Maybe she was moving out. Maybe Mrs. Howard got it wrong. But deep down I knew. I called her. "Lorena?" I said, keeping my voice calm. "Are you selling stuff from my apartment?" There was a pause, then a casual, almost bored reply. "Oh, that, yeah. I figured since you left you didn't want it anymore." "My books? My framed prints? My antique typewriter from Grandpa?" "Well, you didn't take them." "I didn't take a lot of things," I said, trying to hold back the disbelief, because I didn't think I had to take inventory before stepping away from my own life. "Don't be dramatic," she snapped. "You're the one who walked out. I've been dealing with everything since." Dealing. That word. She made it sound like she was handling my absence with grace and sacrifice, when in reality she had turned my home into a garage sale. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I hung up and opened my laptop. Part of me wanted to disappear again, to stay in the quiet safety I'd finally found, but something had shifted. The silence that once comforted me now itched. I needed answers. I logged into my email and started scanning through old threads, contracts, invoices, project backups, just to make sure everything was intact. That's when I saw it. An email I didn't remember sending, attached to a publisher I hadn't spoken with in months. Subject line, "Updated proposal, Madeline Gray." The attachment had my name, my branding, my tone, but not my words. I opened the PDF and scanned the signature page, and there it was, my name, scrawled in a digital signature I never created. It felt like whiplash, not just because it was illegal, but because it was intimate. This wasn't a stranger hacking my account. This was someone who knew how I wrote, someone who knew how I worked, someone who thought they could pass as me. I sat in the dim light of Mara's guest room, the cursor blinking on the screen like it was daring me to stay quiet. But I couldn't. Not anymore. It wasn't just about the stuff she sold or the document she forged. It was about the years I spent absorbing her chaos, cleaning up her messes, covering for her when no one else would. It was about the way I had been trained to protect her, even when it meant betraying myself. But this time she crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let it slide. I pulled out my journal and wrote one sentence. "I have protected everyone but me. That ends now." For the first time in a long time, I felt something stronger than sadness. I felt resolve, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that builds quietly inside your chest like a steady flame, the kind that says, "I see what you've done and I won't let you do it again." There's a strange calm that settles over you when you stop asking for permission to be angry. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I made a list. The kind of list I used to make when I was editing a complicated manuscript. Organized, precise, ruthless in its clarity. I wrote down everything Lorena had done. Dates, screenshots, bank transfers, emails. I made copies. I printed out the forged document and highlighted the signature. I took a photo of the items she sold and cross-referenced them with messages I'd sent her months earlier, asking her to keep them safe. And for every line I wrote, I felt something inside me stand a little taller. I wasn't preparing for revenge. I was preparing for truth. Mara watched me from across the table as I assembled the folders into a plain manila envelope. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked gently. "No," I said, "but I'm done waiting for the right time to be heard." She nodded and pushed a cup of tea toward me. "You've always been calm in the fire, but now you're holding the hose." I smiled at that. It was true. For most of my life, I tried to manage the flames quietly, convincing myself that if I just stayed steady enough, everyone else would calm down. But now I wasn't putting out fires. I was walking into one with my eyes wide open. I called my parents the next day and asked to join the family dinner that Sunday. They sounded surprised but pleased. "We were hoping you'd stop by," my mother said. "Lorena's been feeling a little hurt." Hurt. It always came back to her, didn't it? "She's not the only one," I said flatly. There was a pause. Then, "Of course, sweetheart. We'll see you then. That Sunday, I arrived early. I brought nothing but the envelope. The dining room looked exactly the same. Floral curtains, the smell of overcooked carrots, the clink of silverware being set. Lorena was already there, laughing with my dad like nothing had happened. When she saw me, her expression flickered, just for a second, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "Look who's back," she said too brightly. I didn't respond. We sat down to dinner. My mother commented on the weather. My father mentioned traffic on the interstate. Lorena filled in the silences with stories about her new projects, conveniently leaving out whose name she'd used to secure them. I waited. I let them pretend. And then, as my mother brought out dessert, I placed the envelope on the table. The room fell still. "What's that?" my father asked. I looked at each of them. "I've been gone for 6 weeks," I said evenly. None of you noticed. Silence. I opened the envelope and slid the pages across the table. Emails, receipts, screenshots, the contract with my forged signature. "I didn't come here for an apology," I continued. "I came here to make something clear." Lorena's face paled. My mother blinked. My father looked confused, as if he couldn't quite reconcile the Madeline in front of him with the version he'd always known. "The next time you think about asking me to carry the weight," I said, voice steady, "remember this moment, because I won't do it anymore." No one spoke. Not at first. Then my mother tried to laugh it off. "This feels a bit dramatic, don't you think?" "I think letting someone steal my identity and sell my belongings without consequence would be dramatic," I said calmly. My father leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Madeline, why didn't you just come to us sooner?" "I did," I said. "You told me to be the strong one." And then I stood up. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to draw a line, and I'm done living on the wrong side of it." I didn't wait for permission. I didn't need their approval. I walked out the front door and into the evening air, my body buzzing not with fear but with freedom. And for the first time in years, I felt like my voice belonged to me. They thought it was just another family dinner. Same house, same dishes, same stories that looped like reruns. But I wasn't the same. Not this time. I had spent the week preparing, not just collecting evidence or printing emails. I had been gathering something more important. My voice, the real one. The one I had buried under years of people-pleasing and polite silence. It started as a whisper. Then it became a sentence. Then it became a full page. By Sunday, it had become a decision. I walked into my parents' home wearing the same dress I used to wear to client meetings. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I needed to feel like the version of myself that had earned respect in rooms far less forgiving than my family's dining table. Lorena opened the door. She smiled like nothing had happened. "Wow, you look serious," she said with a little laugh. I didn't smile back. My mother greeted me with her usual flurry of overcompensation, hugging me too tightly, commenting on my weight, asking why I hadn't called more. I let her talk. I sat down at the table. The roast chicken smelled like childhood. The green beans were soggy. The napkins were folded the way she always did, into little fans like we were hosting royalty. I almost laughed at how familiar it all was, as if routine could cover up reality. My father launched into a story about traffic on the interstate. Lorena chimed in with updates on some vague branding collaboration. My mother poured wine like it was glue holding the evening together. No one asked how I'd been. No one mentioned my absence. It was as if my 6 weeks away had been nothing more than a long trip to the grocery store. So I let them talk. I watched the rhythm of their conversation, the way they spoke around tension, not through it. And then, just before dessert, I placed the envelope on the table. The air shifted. "What's that?" my father asked, like he already regretted asking. I looked at him, really looked, and saw not a villain but a man who had spent his life avoiding discomfort. "It's everything you didn't want to know," I said softly. "But now you have to." Lorena rolled her eyes. "Are we really doing this?" I didn't answer her. I looked at my mother. Her hands froze mid-reach for the wine bottle. I looked at my father. His jaw tightened, and I said, "I've been gone for 6 weeks. No one called, no one checked, and in that time, Lorena sold my belongings and forged my signature to get a deal under my name." Lorena laughed, shrill, defensive. "That's not true." I slid the email across the table. "Your voice doesn't matter here," she snapped. I turned to her. It never did, I said, until now. Silence settled over the room like dust. This wasn't about confrontation, this was about truth. It wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, it was steady. I had come not to win, but to be done. And that's exactly what I felt. Done pretending, done explaining, done hoping they'd suddenly become the people I needed them to be. The bickering started after that, but I don't remember most of it. I remember my mother's wounded expression. I remember my father staring at his plate like it held answers. I remember Lorena saying, "This is what you always wanted," to make me look bad. And I remember thinking, no. What I wanted was peace. But if honesty cost me that, I'd still choose it every time. No one touched the dessert. The apple pie sat in the center of the table, steam rising and slowly fading into the cold silence between us. I looked at each of them, not to seek validation, but to make sure they heard me, really heard me. "I haven't lived in that apartment for 6 weeks," I said. "Not one of you noticed, not one call, not one text." My father opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "This isn't a discussion," I said quietly. "This is a boundary." My mother shifted in her seat, her fingers worrying the corner of her cloth napkin. "Madeline," she said gently, "you didn't tell us where you went. We didn't want to pressure you." "You didn't want to be uncomfortable," I replied. "And you never asked why I left, because deep down you already knew." Lorena scoffed. Here we go again. The martyr speech. I turned to her, calm as I'd ever been. "I'm not your fixer anymore." She blinked, taken aback by how even my voice was. "You stole from me. You sold my belongings. You forged my name on a contract. That's not something sisters do." She crossed her arms, but her eyes flickered. "Why are you doing this now?" she asked. "You want everyone to turn on me?" "No," I said. "I want to stop turning on myself." The words hung there, heavy and final. I looked back at my parents. For years, I've been the one who picks up the pieces, the one who's strong enough to handle it. "The one you lean on so much, you forgot I needed support too." My mother looked at me, her lips parted, her eyes full of something, regret maybe, or disbelief. "I always thought you liked being that person," she whispered. "I liked being trusted," I said. "I never agreed to be invisible." My father's voice broke the tension. "You're right," he said. "We didn't see how far this had gone." For a second, I saw the man I remembered as a child, quiet, thoughtful, someone who used to make me believe that if I worked hard and did the right thing, life would be fair. Then Lorena muttered, "She's still being dramatic." And just like that, the moment passed. I stood up slowly, gathering the folder back into my bag. "I didn't come here for apologies," I said. "I came to make myself clear." They all looked up at me, unsure of what came next. I took a breath. "I'm not cutting you out of my life, but I'm no longer offering unlimited access to it." My voice didn't shake. "I'm not going to keep showing up where I'm not respected. I'm not going to keep giving from a place that's already empty. And I'm not going to keep pretending that being family means being used." No one spoke. And for once, I didn't fill the silence. I let it sit, let it sting, because sometimes the truth doesn't echo. It just lands, and that's enough. It didn't take long. The silence cracked like thin glass. "You're being unfair," my mother finally said, her voice tight. "You blindsided us. This is not how families handle things." I met her eyes. "Maybe that's the problem. This is exactly how our family handles things, ignoring what's uncomfortable until it explodes." She flushed. "You're twisting things." "I'm telling the truth." Lorena pushed her chair back. "You always thought you were better than us. That's what this is really about." I turned to her. "No, I thought I mattered too. That's what this is about. You left. You didn't say a word. You made us worry." "No one worried, Lorena. If anyone had, they would have called. They would have noticed my things were missing. They would have asked." My father spoke next, calm but heavy. "You're taking this too far. This feels like punishment." "It's not punishment," I said, steady. "It's protection. For me." He leaned forward. "But you didn't even give us a chance to fix things." I paused. "Fixing something requires acknowledging it's broken." They stared at me like I was someone they didn't recognize. And maybe I wasn't. Not anymore. For years, I had filtered myself down to the most convenient version, helpful, agreeable, quiet. Now that I had stripped all that away, they were left with someone they didn't know how to respond to. So they did what people do when the mirror gets too clear. They attacked. My mother's voice sharpened. "So what now? You walk away from all of us?" "I already did," I said. "And you didn't even notice." That landed harder than I expected. Her hands trembled as she reached for her glass of water. Lorena rolled her eyes. "You're seriously going to hold a grudge over this? Families make mistakes." "This wasn't a mistake," I said. "It was a choice. You chose to take. You chose to ignore. You chose to assume I'd be fine, no matter what." "And now you're just done?" she asked, almost laughing. I nodded. "I'm done being a role in someone else's narrative. I'm done being the strong one if it means never being seen as someone who hurts too." They didn't try to stop me when I stood up. They didn't call after me when I walked toward the door. They didn't follow me out. I stepped onto the porch, the night air sharp and cold. For a second, I thought I might cry. Not from pain, but from the release of holding everything in for too long. But I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath, pulled my coat tighter around me, and walked down the path toward my car. When I got in, I sat for a moment in the quiet. Then I reached into my bag and took out a small envelope I had written the night before. A letter. To them. Not a plea. Not an apology. Just a few lines I needed to leave behind. I walked back, slipped it through the mail slot, and left. They could read it when they were ready. Or not. Either way, I had said what I came to say. And this time, I didn't look back. The apartment felt smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but energetically. Maybe it was the absence of noise, or the absence of her. I walked through the door of my old place, temporarily, just to pick up what was left. I had made arrangements with the landlord. Lorena was gone, the dog too. The walls were quiet again. But it didn't feel like home. It felt like a place I had outgrown. Still, I moved through it with care. Room by room, memory by memory, picking up what was mine, leaving what no longer was. A stack of old manuscripts, my favorite mug with the chipped handle, a framed quote that used to hang above my desk, the tiny glass jar that held beach sand from my trip to Oregon 5 years ago. I packed them carefully, not like someone reclaiming the past, more like someone choosing what to carry forward. In the living room, the air still held traces of perfume that wasn't mine. The couch sagged slightly on one side. A wine stain on the rug stared up at me like a bruise that never healed. I didn't bother scrubbing it. Some marks are better left visible. When I reached my bedroom, I stood for a while in the doorway. This room had seen every version of me. Exhausted, hopeful, overwhelmed, pretending. Now it was empty. Except for one thing. A photo frame on the nightstand. One I hadn't remembered leaving behind. Inside was a picture of my family at a beach trip years ago, everyone smiling. I remembered that trip clearly. I had taken most of the photos, cooked most of the meals, diffused most of the arguments. I picked up the frame, stared at it for a long time. Then, without drama, without a single tear, I turned the photo face down and slid it gently into the drawer. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because I was no longer trying to live inside a picture of what was never real. Some people keep photos as reminders of love, others as reminders of what they survived. That one, for me, had served its purpose. Back at Mara's place that night, I unpacked slowly. The things I brought back felt different somehow, lighter, more honest. I arranged my books on the shelf by theme instead of color. I lit a candle, not to mask anything, but to welcome something. And I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and looked at a blank page with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Readiness. I didn't write immediately. I just sat there with the page, letting it stare back at me without pressure. Knowing that the woman who would fill it was no longer writing from obligation. She was writing from ownership, from truth, from freedom. And that made all the difference. There was a time when I used to sit in the back of rooms like this, quiet, taking notes, nodding along while someone at the front talked about clarity and courage and finding your voice. Now I was the one with the microphone in my hand. It still felt a little surreal. The room was warm and filled with the soft buzz of folding chairs, coffee cups, and the quiet energy of creative people trying to make sense of their stories. A writing conference in a converted library building on the north side. Nothing flashy, nothing grand, but every seat was filled. I stood at the front of the room with a single sheet of notes in my hand and a cup of tea that I hadn't touched. My name was printed on a paper sign taped to the table. Madeline Gray editor, story mentor, essayist. 3 years ago, I wouldn't have believed that was me. I took a breath and looked out at the faces in front of me, some eager, some guarded, all of them carrying something they hadn't said out loud yet. "Hi," I said into the mic, smiling gently. "I'm Madeline, and I edit stories for a living, but for a long time I forgot how to tell my own." That got a few soft laughs, the good kind, the knowing kind. "I used to think strength meant being able to hold it all together," I continued. "Holding your family together, your job, your reputation, your sanity quietly without complaining, without asking for help." A woman in the third row nodded slowly. I saw her, and I saw myself in her. But what I've learned is that true strength sometimes looks like walking away, from noise, from roles that don't fit, from homes that stopped feeling safe. The room held stillness like a held breath. "I didn't plan on leaving my life," I said, "but I had to, because staying meant losing myself, and I realized one day I couldn't keep surviving on scraps of peace, hoping someone would notice I was starving." Someone scribbled that down. "Good. Let them take it with them." I want to tell you something that took me way too long to learn. You don't need to collapse to deserve rest. You don't need to be broken to ask for better. And you don't need anyone's permission to outgrow the people who taught you to doubt your worth. No one clapped. Not yet. They were still in it, still feeling it. And that's what I wanted. To not be impressive. To be real. Later that day, someone from the conference snapped a photo of me talking, hand mid-gesture, face lit by soft window light. They posted it with the caption, "She spoke like someone who had bled on the page and lived to tell it beautifully." I didn't repost it. I didn't need to. But I saved it, not out of vanity, out of gratitude. Because that version of me, confident, rooted, soft and certain, wasn't a performance. She was who I had been becoming all along. In the weeks after the conference, I found myself saying yes to things I used to shrink from. Hosting writing groups at a co-working space downtown, sending out essays that told the truth without softening the edges, letting people know me without earning it through labor. I wasn't building a new life. I was returning to one I had put on hold, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like I was fighting to prove anything. It felt like I was living. Some days, it still catches me off guard. The quiet, the peace, the absence of tension in my chest, like a knot that finally learned how to undo itself. It's not that my life became perfect. Bills still come. Work gets overwhelming. Sometimes the loneliness creeps in on a rainy Thursday when the city feels a little too big. But I no longer live in a constant state of bracing for impact. And that, I've learned, is what freedom actually feels like. It's not a grand declaration. It's not a dramatic exit. It's walking through your own door and realizing you're no longer shrinking in your own life. One morning, I woke up and didn't check my phone right away. I didn't brace for a crisis. I didn't scroll through unanswered messages wondering who needed something from me today. I just stayed in bed, watched the sunlight crawl slowly across the floor, let my breath move at its own pace. And for the first time in years, I felt what I can only describe as enoughness. Not because someone said I was enough, because I decided to believe it for myself. That shift was subtle at first. I stopped saying yes to things that made me feel hollow. I let calls go to voicemail. I unsubscribed from newsletters that promised to fix parts of me I no longer believed were broken. I replaced the picture frames in my apartment with art that felt like me, not a version of me I curated for someone else. I bought flowers for no reason. I started keeping a small list of proofs of life in my journal, not accomplishments. Just evidence that I was present, alive, growing. Things like, I laughed so hard at Mara's joke I nearly dropped my coffee. I said no to a project that didn't align with my values. I danced in my kitchen to an old Fleetwood Mac song. I didn't feel guilty for doing absolutely nothing on Sunday. No one clapped for these moments, but I did. Quietly, in my own way. I realized something else, too. I had spent years trying to earn rest, as if calm and joy were rewards for pushing through enough pain, as if I had to be exhausted to justify a break, but rest is not a prize, it's a right. Healing is not a straight line. Some days I feel strong and certain, Other days, I feel like I'm learning how to walk again. And that's okay, because now I give myself grace I never thought I deserved before. One afternoon, I found an old note I had scribbled during the worst week of my life. It said, "You're allowed to leave a life that looks fine to everyone else but feels like suffocation to you." I remember writing that and feeling like it was a dangerous thought, like I needed to hide it, like wanting more, peace, space, respect, was selfish. Now I read it and think, no, that was the first honest sentence I'd written in years. I kept it, pinned it to the inside of my closet door where only I can see it. Not because I need reminding every day, but because I want to honor the version of me who finally told the truth. There's no celebration for walking away from what breaks you. No medals, no applause. But there's something better. Clarity. And in that clarity, I've discovered a truth more grounding than any validation I ever chased. I was never broken. I was buried, under expectations, under guilt, under a version of love that asked me to disappear to make others more comfortable. But now I'm here. Fully. Not because someone gave me permission, but because I gave myself back to myself. And there is nothing more powerful than that. I never made a grand announcement. There was no dramatic social media post, no email blast or handwritten letter outlining all the reasons why I couldn't go back. Instead, I let my absence speak for itself. I stopped replying to the group texts filled with fake cheer and inside jokes that had always excluded me. I let birthdays and holidays pass quietly. I didn't call, I didn't explain, and when the calls finally stopped coming, I didn't chase them. I chose silence. But this time it wasn't the silence of being ignored. It was the kind I created for myself. And in that space, I found clarity. They called me cold. They said I was overreacting, that I needed to let it go. I heard through Mara that my mother had told a cousin, "She's punishing us. She's never been good at forgiving." But forgiveness wasn't the issue. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was just done. Not in a spiteful way. Not in a way that needed them to hurt back. Just in a quiet, complete, and grounded way that said, this no longer has access to me. I wrote one last letter, not to send, just for me. It read, "I don't hate you. I just love myself more now. And that love comes with boundaries." I folded it up and tucked it into the back of my journal. Not as a reminder, but as closure. One afternoon, I found myself cleaning my new workspace. It wasn't big, just a converted corner of Mara's old sunroom that she had insisted I turn into a writing nook. But it felt like mine. I had a secondhand desk, a thrifted lamp, a corkboard filled with words that moved me. I rearranged some books and found a photo frame I hadn't touched since I moved in. Inside was a family picture, the same one I had flipped face down months ago. I looked at it for a long time. Not with sadness, with distance. I studied the smiles, the arms draped over each other like everything was fine. I remembered the heat of that day, the way I had been the one to coordinate everyone, remind them to show up on time, be the one behind the camera setting the timer, always organizing, always giving, always invisible in the middle of everything. I took the photo out of the frame, slipped it into a drawer, and in its place I added a simple print that said, "No is a full sentence." That tiny act felt bigger than it should have. But that's the thing about transformation. It's not just the big moments. It's the quiet choices, the private ones, the ones no one sees, the ones that say, I am no longer available for things that shrink me. I didn't leave my family to prove a point. I left because I finally believed I was allowed to protect my peace without guilt. And sometimes the most honest form of love is distance. Not every story needs reconciliation. Some just need release. They are who they are, and I am who I am now. And in the quiet of that truth, I'm finally home. If you're still watching, I want to say something to you, especially if you've ever felt like the strong one, the one who held it all together, the one who was told to be patient, to understand, to do the right thing, even when no one did the right thing for you. I see you, and more than that, I know how heavy it gets. You spend years performing strength like it's armor, hoping someone might see the cracks underneath and offer you softness. But softness rarely comes when you're expected to carry everyone else, so you keep carrying. Until one day you wake up and realize you're not even sure who you are outside the roles they gave you. That's where I was. And if that's where you are right now, let me tell you something I wish someone had said to me sooner. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to say, this is too much. You are allowed to ask, what about me? You are allowed to step back from the people who only call when they need saving. You don't owe anyone access to your peace just because you've always been their emergency contact. You're allowed to rewrite the rules, to disappoint the people who only loved you when you were useful, to let go of the version of yourself that made everyone comfortable. You don't need a breakdown to deserve rest. You don't need a reason to leave what hurts. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is walk away from something that once felt like home and choose yourself instead. And no, not everyone will understand. They might call you selfish, cold, too much. Let them. You don't need their permission to come back to yourself. You just need your own. And when you give it, fully, unapologetically, you'll realize something powerful. You never needed fixing. You just needed space to breathe, so take it. Take every inch of space you've earned through every quiet sacrifice. Every time you said yes when you wanted to scream no. Every tear you swallowed so no one else would feel uncomfortable. Take that space and fill it with a life that feels like yours. You deserve that. You always did. Becoming independent isn't about cutting ties. It's about reconnecting with yourself. It's about learning that peace is not something you have to earn through self-sacrifice. That love without respect isn't love at all. That being needed is not the same as being valued. For a long time, I thought choosing myself meant failure, that walking away meant giving up. But now I know the truth. Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do. Sometimes choosing yourself is the most radical act of love. And sometimes the life you've been waiting for only begins when you stop trying to prove your worth to people who were never willing to see it. So wherever you are right now, whether you're still holding it all together or already halfway out the door, know this. You're not alone. You're not selfish for wanting more. You're not dramatic for needing space. You're human, and you're allowed to want a life that doesn't hurt to live. So here's my question for you. If your life were a script, would you recognize the main character? Would she be free? Would she be fulfilled? Or would she still be waiting, quietly, patiently, for someone else to hand her permission? If it's the latter, maybe it's time to stop waiting. Maybe it's time to write a new chapter, one where your voice is not an afterthought, one where your boundaries are not seen as threats but as truth, one where you are not just surviving but living, fully, freely, finally. So, are you ready to rewrite the role you were handed? Because the pen has always been in your hand, and the next page, it belongs to you.